All right,
Russell,
so
did you get your your CLIT question in, or did you want to do that one?
I do want to do that one. All right, so in conjunction with Public last week, you broke the story of Cyber Threat Intelligence League, otherwise known as CLIT. This is what this is what you had to say about them. He said, I don't favor censorship, but if I did, I'd want to be sure the people doing it did not all come from the same economic and educational background. That's clearly the case with CLIT and others like it. These folks come from the same schools and tax bracket. They vomit out the same prefab Flauberian bourgeois idiocies, inhabit the same informational bubble, and boast the same immunity to proletarian frustrations, read reality. And you also said something similar, although I'm taking this from your article. I think you changed it a little in your statement, but in your written version of your statement for Congress, you said take away the highfalutin talk about countering hate and reducing harm, and anti-disinformation is just a bluntly elitist gatekeeping exercise. If you prefer to think in progressive terms, it's class war. So, can you explain what this organization is and why you believe the war on disinformation at this point? I haven't really heard you use this language very much before, but it seems to be a conclusion you're coming to now, that it's really about class.
Well, that's one of the things that happens when you cover something. It takes a long time to see the whole picture sometimes, right?
Sure.
When I did the Wall Street thing, I was probably 2 or 3 years into it before I fully understood the whole scam, of
Right.
mortgage-backed securities. Here, it takes a while to see that. Well, first of all, let's get what is CTI League. CTI League was sort of a precursor to the Election Integrity Partnership or the Reality Project, and it was designed by this very eccentric British woman named Sarah Jane Turp, S.J. Turp. She's a data scientist and former British defense analyst. She worked at a company called an open source company called Ushahidi. Started there in February of 2014. Another person who joined at that exact same time was a person named Jonathan Morgan, who was the CEO of a company called New Knowledge, which was the Senate analyst for the Russian bot report, but they also did that phony deal where they created fake Russians in the Alabama Senate race, and then they were behind Hamilton 68
Right.
as well. So there's a weird Hamilton 68 connection with these people. Anyway, she, in conjunction with this defense official named Pablo Brewer, they set up sort of a volunteer review group to look at ostensibly just COVID misinformation. But we had a whistleblower came forward to Michael basically with all the documents from that group. And what we learn is that basically this volunteer private organization was basically created because DOD, DHS, and Global Engagement Center, and even the CIA and NSA can't do it legally. And so you create these kind of quasi-private structures through which the censorship is done. You guys know the basic thing. But the thing that, and this is the punchline, I think, for all the stuff since the Twitter files is, when you get right down to it, all these programs are very similar. They're run by the same group of people. They go back and forth between media, intelligence, and government. But they all went to the same Ivy League schools that we talked about. And they all, the one thing they all have in common is none of them come from hardship, right? There are no ordinary people involved in doing this work, and that's kind of crucial to understand. It's like you have to be credentialed to get into this thing, and it's almost like having a literacy test for voting. There's a reason why that was a fucked up idea. Well, this is the same thing. Like you're not going to get to be censoring content unless you the EU has very specific language about what kind of, you have to be credential to be what they call a trusted flagger. And I did a FOIA request on one of these programs, and even just to do the grunt work of cleaning up the material for the reviewers, you had to have a bachelor's degree. The people who did the actual reading had to have master's degrees. So it's going to be sort of affluent professional class, people all around the world censoring everybody else. And that's kind of the key, I think, to understanding this whole thing. CTI League is important just because additionally, because it gives us a window into this other universe of shit that we didn't see in the Twitter files, which is the offensive stuff, where they fake news stories and invent things and create sock puppet accounts and stuff like that. We're going to probably learn that they do that a lot more than we thought, but that's coming still. So.
Well, one of the things that really struck me in your article, because you guys got a lot of footage of them and audio of them talking. What often strikes me about people with these credentials and these degrees is that fundamentally they're dumb as dog shit and as boring as milk. They're just the flattest, most uninteresting people, and you really get the sense that they cling so tightly to mores because they have nothing interesting to say. They would have nothing to say if they weren't spouting platitudes and gatekeeping and telling other people what to do. Like what do they have to recommend them? How could they possibly gain any power other than to suck onto social values and appoint themselves to enforce them? Why would anyone pay attention to them?
I mean, there's a woman in one of the videos named Deb Lavoie who was part of this thing called the Reality Team, and she says things like, "Yeah, I don't know a whole lot, but I know about narratives."
Yeah,
and then they have no problem editing or reviewing people who have PhDs in biological sciences, even though they don't know anything themselves. And then they come out and say things like, well, we're going to do the same things that the bad guys do, but we're going to do it for good reasons. So, that's when you start getting into creating sock puppet accounts and creating distractions so that people can't read what they deem to be harmful material. And that's why this stuff is so dangerous, because it's not just suppressing, true content. They're also going to be kind of fundamentally altering reality in other ways by introducing all kinds of, fake stuff into the ether, and we'll have no way of figuring out what it is at a certain point. I mean, right now we're, all trying as hard as we can to point it out. I mean, you guys do it. Everybody, the whole alternative media is very right now focused on, identifying fake stuff and exploding it, but you can't get everything, and then pretty soon they're going to be able to do this so well that it'll be impossible to detect. That's what's scary about it.
well, if there's an element of hope, it is how dumb this audio exposes them as. So you actually have audio there where they're trying to figure out how you determine if a medical research report is actually wrong, and nobody knows. And they're asking, so how do you are there places you can look to find that out? And the person they turn to as like the expert is like, yeah, there are places you can go, so just look for
there are academic paper places. These are the people. I mean, that's what's so fucking terrifying. I mean, and I was saying this to Walter. It's a little bit like the end of the trial when he gets dragged away for execution, and he sees that it's like these three pot-bellied dumb actors who are taking him away to be executed. Underneath the surface of these highly sophisticated programs are these absolute fucking idiots. And it's a little hard to accept at first, but it's fundamental to understanding this whole thing. I interviewed a lot of the military folks who did the counterterrorism stuff. That they built a lot of these tools. Those people are smart. Like they were they were out there doing battle with ISIS and Al Qaeda and whatever you might think of them morally. They actually understood, these are smart people, right? Like,
right.
these people are idiots.
These are busybodies.
Right. Yeah. They came from like corporate marketing. They're like, software marketing executives. If you notice in those videos, the one person who doesn't sound like a total idiot is the DoD guy. And that's consistent with what we've seen. But yeah, that's what's terrifying about this, is that on the domestic speech suppression front, you're going to see all these people who have no real life experience editing, becoming editors in chief of the universe, and that's the future, which is great,
Well, you had, I think this was my favorite one, and this was kind of the star piece. You have like the ultimate shit lib bitching about her shit lib in-laws.
Oh my God.
For not being informed enough. Like, I think if there's any satisfaction here, it's what the release of this material has done to her family dynamics. But
Yeah,
she goes on about how her in-laws are liberals, but they only regurgitate what they get from TV, and what they really need is to be programmed by the likes of her,
Right.
so that they can better argue their liberal positions and not just be on autopilot.
she even has some kind of quote in there, like, if you can even call it thinking, or like if you can even call it their ideas, if you can even call them.
Yeah.
It's something like so fucking insulting.
It's going to be a very awkward Christmas.
Oh yeah, I thought about that. I thought you don't often get a chance to send a cruise missile directly into somebody's family, but look, I would have preferred to interview this person and find out what she's thinking, but they didn't want to talk to us. So, and by the way, that stuff was public anyway. We got it from a whistleblower, but they left it online also. So it's not our fault that it's out there. But yeah, and then by the way, that wasn't the only one. There's another one where she's talking about her son, and about how he thinks everything is bullshit, and he's just a nihilist, and we need to find sort of easier ways to penetrate minds like his and stuff like that. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. These people are very, very affected by their interactions, but with their relatives, which should tell you a lot. Like, you're going to decide the information landscape for the entire world based on how your holiday dinner went. I mean, really? But yeah, people are like that. It's just crazy. And that's why that's by the way, that's one of the reasons why we're getting calls from some of the military folks, is because they're losing their mind seeing this stuff being applied over here. Like, we didn't spend 20 years designing these evil weapons to have them put in the hands of people like this, so that's
a point Chris Hedges always makes, that eventually the things that they do overseas will be used against the population.
Always. Yeah. And I
from the first votes, actual votes being cast in the early nominating contest for the presidential election. And one of the main points of discussion, central focuses heading into this election, centers around the economic well-being of our country. That's because, generally speaking, how people feel about the economy writ large is largely predictive of how an incumbent president will perform if and when they run for re-election. And a lot of people have noticed that there's a strange paradox at the center of our economy, which is that if you look at many, if not most, of the empirical metrics, the economy is doing surprisingly well. If you look at economic sentiment, however, how people feel about the economy, the numbers are near historically pessimistic. There's a real gap between how the economy is actually doing, at least based on most of the measurements we normally use, and how people think the economy is doing. Or, I should say at the very least, how they tell pollsters they feel about it. You can see it here on this chart. You see how the blue line, how you'd expect people would feel about economic numbers, and the red line, how they actually feel, have usually been in sync, right? Like when things get worse, people feel worse. When they get better, people feel better. Right now, there's a huge gulf between them. That gulf, it is worth noting, does not exist in similar wealthy countries like France and Germany and the UK. It's only here, even though we're doing a lot better than those places. And because of this huge debate is broken out about how to explain this fundamental gap. Now, one argument is that people feel so badly about the economy because, well, they're still frustrated by the experience of the last few years, or that there are certain things like housing prices right now that are still very high. And it's true. Housing prices are high right now, and that's hard. Others argue that Americans are just getting inundated with negative messaging about the economy. Now, I got to say, I'm definitely very invested in understanding this phenomenon, but it's worth actually taking a step back just to kind of look at the actual economic record of the incumbent president. What sort of circumstances has he inherited? What has he accomplished independent of the public perception? Let's look at how we got to where we are now. The theme of the Biden presidency has been inheriting a succession of essentially unprecedented crises that have afflicted the entire world and have produced way worse economic outcomes in other peer countries. I mean, the source of all this, of course, right? The original source is that we had, as you might remember, a once-in-a-century pandemic globally that killed millions of people, shut down most of the world economy, shut down entire industries, and then we tried to come back out of it. That's the basic thing to remember. Now, as president, you get credit for things when things are good. You get blamed on when things are bad, even if they're out of your control in both directions. I mean, we saw this in 2019 when Donald Trump had done essentially nothing to help the American economy. In fact, tried his best to hurt it with those massive tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations and a ridiculous trade war. But he still presided over an economy that was finally recovering after a financial crisis a decade later, and he got the credit for it. We also saw it in 2020 to a certain extent when COVID annihilated the U.S. economy and the incumbent president, Donald Trump, lost. And once Joe Biden took over, basically from the very moment he was sworn in, we became inundated with negative messaging about the economy. Some of it, a lot of it, was rooted in real crises the administration had to tackle. A lot of it was overhyped. Now, this collective freakout about the economy happened across the media ecosystem, but it was most pronounced on Fox News. I think it's worth taking a look at what exactly Americans have been hearing about the economy over the past few years and compare that with the actual circumstances and, crucially, how the Biden White House responded, right? They inherit the circumstance. How they respond is up to them. Let's start with the issue of labor, of workers. Biden took office amid an unprecedented global pandemic. Remember, there was not even a widely available vaccine when he was sworn in. As a result, the Biden administration continued the economic stimulus from the Trump pandemic response, right? They passed on a party line vote the American Rescue Plan. Huge amount of aid to families directly, included additional direct cash payments, an additional $300 a week in unemployment benefits. This was a big risk, let's remember. And Fox's response to labor shortages, which were real, amid a deadly global pandemic, was that suddenly no one wanted to work anymore.
Biden created a labor shortage because he gave workers way too much free money.
183,000 people dropped out of the labor force.
Biden created a labor shortage.
Labor shortage is labor shortage. An 81-year-old woman pitches in during the nationwide labor shortage.
They just can't find people.
With the labor shortage, people are making more money to stay home. They're bringing out the robots.
Now, some businesses had trouble finding workers.
Welcome to a Friday edition of Straight Out of politics. I'm your host for today. I'm CJ. That stands for Compton J on social media, J in real life. When Chris Hayes here goes shows the clip of I think it's Fox News, it's like one group of clowns talking about the other group of clowns. You ever seen that meme where it's like Ronald McDonald pointing at each other, or the burglar from Ronald McDonald pointing at each other? It's like twins. That's what this is, because what he's doing is propaganda, and what he's bringing up to show as look at this ridiculousness from Fox News is also propaganda. So I wanted to cover this before our guest gets here, or in the middle, because he will get here when it's still opportunity to talk about this subject, and that is Biden economics. But before I dive into the first segment here, just to let you know, of course, let me put the graphic up. We have Maximillian Alvarez joining us today. We're going to be talking about a lot of things today. And one of those things is the other person you saw on that graphic with Maximillian. And that is Refaat Alareer. I think that's how you say his last name, but I know you say his first name is Refaat. Who was a poet, an author. I mean, you can consider him a journalist for the work he was doing, but he was killed, and he's I would say he's world renowned. It's just an outpouring of condolences that's going out all over social media. So we're going to be covering that. We're also going to be covering or answering or discussing the question, because Maximilian is known for labor and talking about workers all the time. That's like, he's so focused on that. So how labor can help with the fight against genocidal Israel. We'll just talk about a couple of things he's written in a couple of podcasts. And then we have the cable news is mad as hell. And that's the story we're starting out right now. It's basically the disconnect between the economic reality of Americans versus the propaganda of Biden economics. And you see it unfolding right there with Chris Hayes. Yet again, another topic, if we have enough time, because this is a shortened version. Today's my birthday, so I got to get out of here pretty soon. But Palestinian labor unions call to action. Also, hopefully to get to that with Max. I wonder if he goes by Max for short. The sad, disgraceful fall of Bernie Sanders. That's Nick from RBN brother Nick. His latest, what are those things called? The videos he puts out, the TikTok-like videos he puts out. I forget what they're called. We'll cover that. And then union blocked from voting on a pro-Palestinian resolution. So there's this union, I think it's in New York, that was going to vote on this pro-Palestinian resolution just to say they're in solidarity, and the union bosses went to court to get that stopped. And we'll talk about that also with Max. Hopefully we have time to get to all of that today. And before I get into the story, hit that like button. Make sure we get to... Oh, wow. Somebody sent a happy birthday super chat. Thank you so much for that. Oh, I usually like not so much space above my head. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for that super chat and the birthday wishes. And that's from Solomon Mendez. And thank you for this super chat. Is a regular John. I don't know why this is acting up. I got to take it off in order to see the names on here. This is weird. Let me try it again. All right, there we go. Now I can see it. John Freeze, a regular. I saw the picture, but the name wasn't showing up to me. Thank you for this super chat. And I'll read on the screen. Wow, Chris Hayes sounds like Rachel Maddow in the way he speaks. I didn't realize how much he has changed, I should say. And my question would be, change from what? I've always known him to be this person, so I am curious, quite curious, but I haven't been in this left space for more than maybe 2 years, 3 years, 3 years, not 2, 3 years. So it could be. This one from Janice. And I'll put it up here. Happy birthday, CJ. I got to actually read it on my TV screen. It's so weird. Thank you for the birthday wishes. That's Janice, another regular here. And I see all the ones in the super chat. Or I'm sorry, in the regular chat. I'll put those up in a bit. But let's get back into the story. Before the gets here, I got about 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes before the guest gets here. I want to get through, because there's a lot of video content that I don't want to have them sit through. Because we got about 45 minutes an hour, 45 to 60 minutes with him. But let's get into this story, and that is, do I have a, I do not. Wow. Oh, here it goes. And we're calling this segment the reality of the American economy versus the propaganda of Bidenomics. And I'm going to rewind this because he starts out. Now, what these segments do, notice the tone of these segments about the economy and Biden economics. A lot of the tone, and you'll hear this same tone when they're talking about Trump. Anytime when they're talking about a subject where you should be believing this line, if you're not, it's a very arrogant tone. It's a very like this is ridiculous if you don't know this kind of thing. So understand that's the framing that I view it. I believe I'm accurate, but let's listen.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We are just a few weeks from the first votes, actual votes being cast in the early nominating contest for the presidential election. And one of the main points of discussion.
Oops. One thing I want to say, and I hit the wrong button. It's because what just popped in my head, and this is just a random thought, but I guess it's related, and that is, it's so normal here, but I would say unusual, and I would maybe not unusual internationally, because I've been internationally, and it's kind of, there's a lot of American influence. But like our news is not at all even meant to be informative. It's an advocacy. So he's coming on not to tell us the information. He is to tell us how we should be feeling about the information. It's a very different dynamic than news that I've seen in, let's say, where have I been? Colombia, Cali, Colombia. Now, I didn't understand the language. I was having somebody translate it to me. I just didn't get the feeling. And what about when I was in Germany? Same sort of feeling, I guess. But let's listen as he talks, and I'll point out some of the you'll hear the arrogance in his tone, but I'll point out some of the phrasing that he makes here.
Votes, actual votes being cast in the early nominating contest for the presidential election. And one of the main points of discussion, central focuses heading into this election, centers around the economic well-being of our country. That's because, generally speaking, how people feel about the economy writ large is largely predictive of how an incumbent president will perform if and when they run for re-election. And a lot of people have noticed that there is a strange paradox at the center of our economy, which is that if you look at many, if not most, of the empirical metrics, the economy is doing surprisingly well.
So it's a strange paradox that what the rich elite class is saying about the economy, it's strange that the people aren't going along with that. That's what's strange. And Nick and I have been talking about this a lot, but you notice there's a lot of this going on in media lately. You see it with the Palestinian issue, where it's like, wait a minute, we are the narrative drivers, and this is me talking as corporate news, and we're saying this, and it's not taking any effect. You see it also with Trump, 91 indictments, all of this stuff. Trump is up. Nationally, Trump is up. In individual states, Trump will win the presidency as it stands right now. So what they're saying is not effective at all. the years of propaganda, the years of criminalization of Donald Trump has zero effect. That because their propaganda no longer has the same effect. And I think this election is going to be the election that displays that very fact the most clearest that we've seen in a long time. Like I said, you see it in the Palestinian issue, and you're also now seeing it on this economic issue. I'll rewind it just a tad and let him finish his thought here.
Economy, which is that if you look at many, if not most, of the empirical metrics, the economy is doing surprisingly well. If you look at economic sentiment, however, how people feel about the economy, the numbers are near historically pessimistic. There's a real gap between how the economy is actually doing, at least based on most of the measurements we normally use, and how people think.
How the economy is doing, the most pivotal part or the most sensitive part in that statement is based on the metrics that you're picking. And then I think he's going to go into it, but this is where the strange part, this is what explains the strange part, is the metrics that you're selecting to indicate that the economy is doing well. From the perspective of a worker, the economy is doing well if my household economy is doing well. Why would I judge or make a judgment on the economy based on the pocketbooks of anything outside of my household? Why would I do that? That makes no sense. So, let's continue.
Think the economy is doing, or I should say at the very least.
Okay, I gotta read. This is one of the phrasings. This is one of the phrasing where this is the arrogance, and you hear the sarcasm.
Near historically pessimistic. There's a real gap between how the economy is actually doing, at least.
Understand, he's establishing fact to his audience. There's a real gap between how the economy is actually doing. So he's establishing that the assessment or their assessment of how the economy is doing is a fact. And then look how he phrases the opposite argument of that same thing.
At least based on most of the measurements we normally use, and how people think the economy is doing.
How people think their economy is doing. So if you can't pay your rent, that's you think you can't pay your rent. That's not you actually being able to pay your rent, according to Chris Hayes here. Now I'm going to pause here because I'm kind of moving quickly here to get through some of this before Maximillian gets here. But now let's switch here because it's related, and this is all one segment. But let's switch to this segment on. It's called "The Rent is Too Damn High." Who's to blame for the terrible economy? This is from The Hill. Actually, let me get right past that part. Here we go.
Americans can all agree on, left, right, and center, it's that everything is too damn expensive. But where the blame for the economic malaise goes is a matter of debate. Former Arizona gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake placed the blame squarely at Joe Biden's feet, tweeting, "Food, transportation, housing, and energy are the basic necessities we need to survive. Thanks to Bidenomics, we're spending an extra $11,400 annually on them."
Let me pause here. Now, let's look at the tweet. Let's see if I can get these other words off. Maybe I'll go off in a second. I can read it. It says food, transportation, housing, and energy. Now, think back to Chris Hayes. Are we individually, are you able to assess whether your food, whether your transportation, whether your housing, or whether your energy cost has gone up, stayed the same, or gotten better? Are you able to make that assessment? I would say yes. I would say you're the only one able to make that assessment of your own life. I mean, unless you went, to like some auditor or something like that. All right. So, but let's get back to the video.
No amount of gaslighting from Joe Biden can distract from the fact that we can barely afford to keep the lights on.
But Biden hit back at GOP critics, namely Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, taking credit for what his administration sees as a booming economy. Let's listen.
The historic investments we're celebrating today is in Congressman Boebert's district. She's one of the leaders of this extreme mega movement. She, along with every single Republican colleague, voted against the law that made these investments in jobs possible. And that's not hyperbole, that's a fact. And then she voted to repeal key parts of this law. And she called this law a massive failure. You all know you're part of a massive failure? Tell that to the 850 Colorados who get new jobs in Pueblo and see us win thanks to this law. Tell that to the local economy that's going to benefit from these investments.
This feels like one of those everybody's a little bit right and everybody's a little bit wrong ones for me. I think it's absolutely true. The CBS report that people require another $11,400 a year to feel as financially safe as they did in 2021. It's absolutely true. And the Biden administration trying to gaslight people out of that reality isn't working. There are sectors in which the economy has rebounded, but if you discreetly look at some of these areas like housing costs and food costs, core costs for Americans and families, those are up, and you can't just hand wave that away. At the same time, I think it is.
You can't just hand wave those things away. Now, she does make another point, is sort of a satellite point, but let's let her make it.
It's true that Republicans do like to exploit these kinds of economic downturns and blame Democrats for them without putting forward any policies of their own that would actually ameliorate the conditions people are complaining about.
Right, which is also spot on. Now, let's go back to Chris Hayes now. So, now that we've established through another media source what actually is going on in people's pocketbooks as far as the economy and the things that matter to them, remember food, transportation, housing, and energy. Now let's go back and listen to what Chris Hayes, the gaslighting Chris Hayes, is attempting to do here. Somehow we can't determine whether those things in our lives are on a good trajectory or good currently or not. Let's listen.
Real gap between how the economy is actually doing, at least based on most of the measurements we normally use, and how people think the economy is doing. Or I should say at the very least, how they tell pollsters they feel about it. You can see it here on this chart. You see how the blue line, how you'd expect people would feel about economic numbers, and the red line, how they actually feel, have usually been in sync. First, people feel worse. When they get better, people feel better. Right now, there's a huge gulf between them.
Now, the way he described this correlating line here with the economy and how people are feeling about it is missing missing a gaping hole. And that is, all this line tells us is that the effectiveness of your propaganda align with the markers tell you the economy is doing good for owners. Now, let me say that in a different way. All the markers that indicate the economy is doing good, what they use, stock market, GDP, unemployment rate, those are all things that indicate for an owner, a capitalist, in other words, if they're doing good in a said economy. In this economy, I should say, not said, but this economy. But those same markers have zero to do with how workers are doing in this economy. Nothing to do with it. So the correlation, so the markers that you're telling me that's saying that the economy is doing good, that's the markers. So let's say one of those lines is blue. And then the red line saying, oh, people's sentiment about the economy is sort of correlated. No, that's just you gaslighting people about the economy, correlated with their reactions. That's all that means. And this gap is showing how people aren't buying the BS that corporate media has been selling. That's what the gap explains. But let's let him continue a little further.
That gulf, it is worth noting, does not exist in similar wealthy countries like France and Germany and the UK. It's only here, even though
he says similar wealthy countries or similar white countries. This guy's
we're doing a lot better than those places.
He's decent, but he's by far not top level propagandist.
And because of this huge debate is broken out about how to explain this fundamental gap. Now, one argument is that people feel so badly about the economy because, well, they're still frustrated by the experience of the last few years, or that there are certain things like housing prices right now that are still very high. And it's true. Housing prices are high right now, and that's hard. Others argue that Americans are just getting inundated with negative messaging about the economy. Now, I got to say, I'm definitely very invested in understanding this phenomenon, but it's worth actually taking a step back just to kind of look at the actual economic record of the incumbent president. What sort of circumstances has he inherited? What has he accomplished independent of the public perception? Let's look at how we got to where we are now. The theme of the Biden presidency has been inherited.
So this is where he's going to go into severe gaslighting and trying to use propaganda tactics like emotions, like, you know, like guilty by association, bringing up Trump, things like that to make his point. Now, this is all to confuse the audience member who is saying the economy is bad to say, oh, wow, well, this explains it, to change their mind. Now, notice how the media is used. It's used, or notice what the ruling class does. It never changes ideology in the so-called democracy when they have pushback. It never changes that. What it does is just reform the same message. That's all they do, is reform the same message. This is what you hear strategists talking about all the time. All right, so let's get through to some other receipts here, and the guest will be coming. Let me check and make sure I haven't heard anything from him. But let me get to another receipt here while I check on that. Oh, actually, I think Zoya messaged me. So let me check that here. Now, we're going to move from YouTube, and we're going to come back to that in a little bit, but we're going to move to Twitter for a couple of receipts here. And there's a couple of things I want to play. The importance of the economy. And I cover this. This is a short clip, a minute and a half clip of a longer segment that I covered. It was like a 10-minute long segment from CNN. We covered about all of his polling, but this is a snippet about just the economy. So let's play this to kind of lay a little more foundation for the conversation.
We asked an open-ended question. What is the most important issue for Americans? And overwhelmingly, respondents in the poll say it's the economy, 42%. 12% say immigration, 10% foreign policy, partisanship and divisions in the country, 6%. 6% say guns and crime. So on issue number one of the economy, it's a pretty poor outlook from the American people. Only 29% assess current economic conditions as good. 71% say they are poor. I'll note that's a slight uptick from what we've seen before, but still, it's in the cellar.
So this is when Chris Hayes refers to the gap between what he says is actually the reality of the economy and what people feel or think the economy is. This is what he's talking about, because this is this is not just a bad poll. This is comes to something like the economy going into a re-election year. I do see our guest is here, Maximillian Alvarez. You just let me know, Max, whenever you're ready to go, if you're set, and then I'll go ahead and bring you in, sir. Okay. Oh, you know what? You sent me a message. My bad. All right. We're going to continue this conversation, although we're at the tail end, so that we can get to some of the other news I want to get to since our guest is here. Let me take this out. So, let me give him the proper introduction. Maximillian Alvarez will be joining in just a second. He is an author, a journalist. First time meeting him in person. I guess this can be considered in person, but from all the content over the years I've seen of him, seems like a genuinely honest guy and genuinely wants to help workers. That's his path. He's been an advocate for labor, one of the staunchest advocate for laborers that I've seen, and pretty steady, never wavering on that, which is something I do respect of his work. And lastly, he is the editor-in-chief over at the Real News Network. Here is Maximillian Alvarez. How you're doing, sir?
Hey man, thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm blushing over here. It really means a lot.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. What I love about this is just something before we get into it. So what I love about your work, what you don't find a lot in podcasts, is that you don't do surface level sort of work. You don't do surface level sort of analysis. You know what I mean? Like a lot of this podcast space is surface level. I would say RBN typically goes a little bit more under the surface level, but the content that you put out is the nitty gritty, like really down in it. So my first question before we get into some of the news content is like, what brought you to sort of doing the work? What inspired you to sort of do this type of work that you do, and what keeps you going to sort of keep on this path?
Oh, man, again, I just wanted to thank you for the question. It really means a lot, right? Because as you know, right, when we're here day in, day out doing this work and we're talking to like screens, it can feel like, is anybody out there, is this making a difference? Is what I'm trying to communicate to people coming across? So like I feel a lot of solidarity with other folks in our line of work who are doing that, trying to do that honest work of work, because I would say the same back to y'all. Like we're all part of this ecosystem that we've recognized people need, because corporate media fucking sucks, and they've been lying to us like our whole lives. They serve the interest of the ruling class. It's like an all big shadow game. So we're like, okay, we need our own media to know what the hell is going on in our world and to talk about what we as the people can do to fix it. And so, like I said, I feel in solidarity with everyone who's part of that ecosystem. And I like to think that the work that I do on my show, Working People, which I started, as you said, years ago, just interviewing folks, and I'll talk about how that started in a sec, but like I just talk to working people about their lives, their jobs, their dreams, their struggles. And to your point, like I've always found my favorite part of doing that work is really connecting with folks on that deep human level. Like you're actually just sitting in a living room with each other or at a coffee shop and really getting to know one another, because I have a fundamental belief that the stuff that makes us human, the stuff that reminds us that we're so much closer to each other than we can appear when we only see each other in these sorts of big boxes and categories and whatnot. But when you actually like see the raw human impact of capitalism on people's bodies, on their families, on their stories, right? You see, it's like we're all the walking wounded of late capitalism, but still, and we all bear those scars. And I think it's important to talk about that. That's where I started. I think I started my show in a way like a decade ago when I was working as a temp warehouse and factory worker in Southern California, not knowing what the hell went wrong and what I was going to do with my life. And my family was losing everything. We lost our house, like so many millions of other families. And on the news that we would have on the TV every night, because we couldn't bear to just have the house be silent. We just always had the shitty news on. They were talking about this recovery, economic recovery, and we're looking around. I was like, well, I guess that's not us, so we must be doing something wrong. And I just remember how little that made us feel. And then in retrospect, I see how much work that does for capitalism to make us believe that we are just these pissants who like if we're not doing well, it's we suck and we're doing something wrong, or we're undeserving of having like a just, nice, comfortable, dignified, sustainable fucking life where the cops aren't killing us and the corporations and the government aren't indebting us and yada yada yada. And so anyway, that's a long rambling way to say is that like that was where I was really learning that there was so much pain locked up inside of me and my family, in my coworkers, that made us all recede into one another and just become the compliant, silent, suffering subjects that capitalism wants us to be. People who saw each other as their enemies, rather than the people who were, profiting off of our misery. And I could see that in my own family most immediately. I saw that my dad, it's like the lights were on but no one was home, right? I'm sure all of us have seen that in our parents at one point or another, whether it's because a loved one is now incarcerated, whether it's because a loved one was killed serving in the military, dying for a war that we don't need to be fucking fighting. I mean, just it was of that nature of lostness that I saw in my dad, and I saw everything that I loved about my family kind of falling apart, including in myself. And so that's why the first episode of my show that I ever recorded was with my father, Jesus Alvarez, because I joke that the show was almost a ruse to get my dad to talk about what he would not talk about in any other context. Like, he was never given the tools to talk about what we were going through, like to have come to this country, to have been born in a lean-to shack in Tijuana. His father abandoned him and his siblings. His mom dies of cancer when he's 6. He gets split up from his siblings, but brought to the United States, lives, this like up and down life, becomes a citizen, marries my mom, has a family, has a house, loses the house, loses everything he feels like he has, come to this country for. He had no way to really talk about that. But when I told him about the idea for what I wanted to do, it kind of made it okay for him, because I think that the thought of other people hearing it made it seem like maybe it meant something. But also, this was a weird side effect of capitalism, because my dad was driving for Uber and Lyft, and he's not a real talkative guy. Like, if you get him going on something that he likes, he'll keep going, like myself, as you can see. But because of that setting, unlike what he was doing before in real estate, where he like kind of didn't have to interact with a whole lot of people a lot of the time, now he's in the car with strangers all the time, and he's got to sort of be nice to get his ratings up, right? And so, being the hardworking guy that he is, he can't be charming. He's getting into these conversations with people he otherwise would not have met, and he starts learning through those conversations that he's driving people his age who also lost their homes, immigrants who are also his age working 2 jobs and aren't going to retire. I really do think that experience opened him up in a way that none of us could, to making him feel at least a little bit more like it wasn't just him, it wasn't all his fault. And that's a lesson that I think working people all need to learn. And that's why we do the work that we do, right? Whatever form that takes. It could be the interviews that I do, it could be the dialogues that y'all have, the ways you analyze and critique corporate media lies and provide people with a way of thinking that they're not going to see when they turn on the television. It could be, the documentary reports that we, publish on our YouTube channel. Like, all of us are trying to like do what we can to sort of, I think, like speak to that thing that I wanted to try to lift up in the show, which is that, like, it doesn't have to be this way. And it's not all your fault that you feel like crap, or that like you feel like you're trapped and no one's here to help you. And, it's all your fault. Like, that is in fact how
I feel like
Sorry.
you're talking about like sort of like the internet has opened up this sort of gaping, filled this hole where peer-to-peer sharing, like when the story about your father, that's a peer-to-peer sharing. He's talking to somebody else, and he's real. Oh wait, I'm not the only one who had this experience, and it feels like that is something is going to be unbreakable. But on the other hand, you see that censorship coming in about things like about peer-to-peer sharing. But continue with your story about how you got into this business. I'm not sure I've heard this story anywhere before. I don't know if you've told it. I'm sure you have somewhere, but this is the first time I'm hearing this story. But continue.
Well, no, I mean, I really appreciate it because I guess I've told bits and pieces of it in different contexts, but I guess no one's been as generous as you, like letting me just sort of like walk in retrospect over the genesis, like taking your question and thinking it through, like what got me into doing this work. Yeah, I think like you're right. I think I would be very curious to hear how y'all have been navigating this as well, and how you entering this work have sort of like first, like, yeah, we all start with like an optimism, right? And then we start running up against the very, very annoying like rules and restrictions and algorithms and unaccountable corporations who can just disappear our shit like that. So yeah, let's make a note to circle back to that in a second. But yeah, speaking of like the internet age, like there was something too as well, the medium of podcasting, something that I found in the medium of podcasting that I hadn't found as a writer before that, because that's, I guess, where I really got started in the media was I started, publishing a few freelance, like, essays in lefty magazines. And then I ended up getting a column at the Baffler magazine, which is the mag that Tom Frank co-founded like back in the 80s. It was a quirky like lefty magazine kind of thing. I love them. They do great work. But they are pretty niche, and that's where I started, and that was in the Trump moment. That was in 2016. And so it's very uncomfortable for me, and I think for all of us who like in some way know that like deep down, like we wouldn't have careers if it wasn't for Donald Trump. And so like, what do we do with that? Like, because I think there was a hunger, and that moment of like, how could we have not seen this? Right. Like a lot of people did feel genuinely gobsmacked that Donald Trump was now going to be president of the United States. Yes. And I think that the media did play a big part in that. There's a lot of just basic wholesome American naivete that was also part of it, but the media does play a huge role in that. And like people are learning now with Palestine, right? The people are feeling genuinely shocked that like, how could who I feel like is a genuinely worldly or good person, they feel like they've missed like something massive, and that's a very complicated feeling. But anyway, so that's where the writing got started, and I got like sucked into the online discourse writing world, and like Jacobin, the Baffler, all these other like little lefty publications. But Jacobin was really blooming and blossoming at that point. So were like some of the original lefty podcasts, like Chapo and whatnot. But yeah, so like I got really invested in that for like a couple years, and it was still important to me, and I still feel like a writer at heart. 'Cause I'm just like a big literature dweeb at heart. Like I never get to read anymore, but like that was always like it's weird. I feel like my path to doing this work also ran through literature because another side of the story I won't get into was like me going to college, abandoning like the plan of being a medical doctor, and like doing literature. And my family had no idea what they were like. Yeah, you could be a professor. That sounds fine. And then I run smack into a recession. It was like, oh, I guess that degree was useless. And anyway, like, but my politics ran through literature in an interesting way, and I do feel a very storytelling like appreciation for that side of what we do. And I think that's also why I love doing the kind of interviews that I do, where people get to tell their own stories, and I'm just there to listen to them and try to help them tell them the way they want to tell them, and share their reality with the world. But yeah, like I think that crap, what was I saying just before that? Well, anyway, right, so the literature thing, storytelling thing, but anyway, to go back to make a long story somewhat shorter, I got exhausted with the sort of like pissing contests that were going on in the lefty writing world.
Media's okay.
Like it started, like, for a while I was like, oh, I can be part of this, I can change the conversation, I can, if I argue really well for why that position's dumb and wrong and we should try to do this, maybe it can make a difference. But all I saw, I mean, I think maybe it did for some people, but I think I saw the gross side, where a lot of it was like, you know, people were using those platforms to sort of build their own personal brands, or their you know, own little like sects and camps that were more interested in arguing with each other than doing the thing that the left is supposed to do, which is change the world for the better, right? And so that was around the time that I wanted to do the podcast with my dad and do an audio thing. And I still, to this day, like really, really love and prefer audio podcasts, because you get to be like, there's an intimacy to it. When you can it's just you and the voice on the other end. And I think that is part of why over years, you know, so many people whom I've never met in person, workers who like were on, a worker who was on the Deepwater Horizon when it blew, you know, and caused the largest oil spill in, you know, US history. You know, timber workers in Maine, teachers, you know, in LA, you know, exotic dancers in LA. Like you just get to talk to so many incredible people, and you learn over the course of that work that everyone has such an incredible story to tell. And there's so much knowledge and wisdom and love and loss and humanity in those stories. And I think that in telling them, we empower ourselves, right? We remind ourselves that our lives are valuable, our dreams do matter, right? And our pain is real, and worth talking about. And if we do care about each other as much as we want to believe, we should fight to fix that, not just for ourselves, but for each other, because we deserve better than that. That is ultimately the core of my work, of the core mission, I think, of my work, is to remind people that they deserve better than this. We all deserve better than this. We deserve a planet that we can all live on, right? And that isn't going to be like a apocalyptic hellscape in a century, right? We deserve a world that isn't constantly at fucking war, because you know, a couple goddamn like manufacturers of death are profiting off of it, and you know, the people who invest in those death merchants are also profiting off of it. And you know, like the fucking colonial hubris is like spreading all the time to try to claim more and more and more for the world, while working people of the world are just like laboring away trying to make a life for themselves, while funding all of that. And like, it's just like, it's such a massive, daunting, horrifying task that we have in front of us. And I think it's going to take all of us to try to kind of make that change. And I guess what we in the media sphere, our collective independent media sphere, right, you know, honest and not corporate bought off, not bullshitty media sphere, like what we're trying to do is just reach people, you know, who are lost in that sea of corporate propaganda and capitalist ideology, and you know, all the pains and hurts and indignities that we live through on a day-to-day basis in this goddamn country and in this 21st century around the world. If we're going to like stop this madness and like reclaim the world before it's too late, and actually like take power back away from these vampires who are ruining everything. You know, we got to start building power wherever we can. And like that's not going to happen just like at an instant. We can maybe get people to the street in an instant, but we're not going to build power in an instance. We're going to build power by first reminding ourselves that we can have it, or that we have it, and that we can exercise it if we work together. And that's what I find, the message that I find in the labor movement and the worker struggles that come through the stories of the people that I talk to. But it's, you know, it's everywhere. It's in the work that we try to cover at the Real News. It's in people filming the cops and knowing their rights, and, you know, like taking the cops to court and suing them, you know, because they're more informed about their rights. And then the people like my colleagues, Stephen Janis and Taya Graham, reporting on that honestly, instead of like the propaganda that people are getting on their local news stations. Right. I mean, that sense that like, no, we don't have to just sit here and keep taking it. We don't have to keep taking orders. Like, we can actually like push back against this, and we should push back against this, and we shouldn't wait for someone to come do it for us, because clearly that's not going to happen. And so I think at the center of the mission, the theory of change here is that if you can show people that they do deserve better, that they can get better, that people around them every day are fighting for better, and you supply them with the information for what better can look like, and how they can get there, and you report on those struggles of people who are achieving that thing, whether it be unionizing their workplace or their their apartment complex or what have you. Then people start getting a thirst for power. They start feeling what it's like to have power and exercise it in their world, and changing your workplace, making your boss come to the table and talk about what they're going to pay you. Like that is such a very powerful form of power that most people will never experience in this country. But once you do, you're like, oh shit, like what if we can bring all these fuckers at the top, part of my language, like what if we can bring Elon Musk, like, I mean, like, you know, and all that stuff. Like, that's just where I think it starts to build, wherever people feel like they're actually flexing some muscles and that they can move the ball forward and not just be on the defensive. Anywhere and everywhere that is happening, I want to talk to the people who are involved in it. And I think all of us can help do that. Like, I think a lot of people in this ecosystem are really trying to do that, and it's really exciting, even though the stuff we report on is so damn depressing most of the time. Okay, that's my
no, that was a great, and I would still consider as a probably a shortened version of the story, because I have a ton of questions, but we'll save those questions for the next time we have you on, because I do want to, you know, pay our respects by covering the killing of someone that just an outpouring of yes, just an outpouring of condolences, and just an outpouring of just people talking and remembering Refaat. And I just want to just, you know, give him the proper respect of just at least speaking about it. It could be a touchy subject. I know for me, I had to look at all of his stuff before I came here, so I wouldn't get as emotional as, you know, I don't, you know, want to be on here tearing up, because this person was he was a very genuine person. That's what's always, like, the genuine ones are the ones that's taken first, and he was definitely just one of the just very genuine people, and you can just radiate it through the screen. For me, through the screen, I never had a chance to meet him in person. So I do just want to just briefly, just for those that may not have heard Democracy Now!, kind of put together a little 6-minute segment. I'll play maybe 90 seconds of it, just so we can, for those that don't know, hear the news and who he is, if you don't know exactly who Refaat is. So here goes. Let's listen to the first maybe 90 seconds of this here.
Earlier this week, an Israeli airstrike in Gaza City killed the acclaimed Palestinian academic and activist Refaat Alareer, along with his brother, his sister, and 4 of his nieces. For more than 16 years, Alareer worked as a professor of English literature at the Islamic University of Gaza, where he taught Shakespeare and other subjects. Refaat Alareer was a father of 6 and a mentor to many young Palestinian writers and journalists. He also co-founded the organization We Are Not Numbers. He authored dozens of stories and poems about life under Israeli occupation in Gaza. In a few minutes, we'll speak to one of his friends. But first, I want to return to Refaat Alareer in his own words. He's spoken to us several times. This is October 10th. As he spoke to Democracy Now!, Israeli strikes rattled his family's home in Gaza City.
What is happening in Gaza is complete and utter extermination of the non-Jewish population in occupied Palestine. As you mentioned, Israel ordered a medieval hermetic siege from air and sea. Israel has also just bombed the only way out through Egypt, the Rafah crossing. The only way out is for what's happening, what we are foreseeing is slow starvation, slow genocide. Maybe Israel is going to push us all into the sea. And I think what is making it even more difficult than before is that the whole world, not even lip service, all American and European countries and politicians are rushing to pledge allegiance to Israel and to Netanyahu. Israeli American politicians, American presidential hopefuls are literally calling for genocide. American mainstream media is not pushing back against Israeli officials, calling for the collateral damage of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. Why is this happening? Because we refuse to live under occupation. We refuse to live in total submission. We want.
I do want to pause there. This is October 10th, so that's just under 2 months from now, where he went on Democracy Now! And just understand, like, just doing interviews like this puts him in danger, or put him in danger. I'll put it that way. And he still did, and I'll get to some of his writings where he spoke about, you know, the very likelihood or the possibility, or it's plausible that, you know, he would be killed. And he said, you know, he wanted to stay there with his people to the end. And that is something that is truly admirable. The doctors in Gaza, a lot of them have a lot of the same sort of sentiments. And we'll pause here, and I'll let you, if you have any words you want to say, any sort of memories you want to recall of him, that you want to share with us. If you have any, you know, take this opportunity. Then I'll get back. I do want to show a couple of other videos of him speaking, just as a remembrance, and then we'll move into some more Palestinian. We're not really going away from the issue. We're just inserting the broader topic. But what are your, you know, what do you have to say about what's happening, or what has happened to him and his work? And what do you have to say about just him, just like him, the person?
Well, and I really appreciate you so graciously being like, okay, let's take that long story and get back and get to Refaat, because you're absolutely right. And maybe I was talking so much because it's easier to do that than think about Refaat, because it's weird, man. Like, it's a weird feeling, this feeling, because not that any of this is about me. I'm just trying to sort of talk through how I'm coming to this right now. Like, you know, again, everyone who's trying to do the work we were just talking about in this media space, in this moment, when this horror is happening right now, as we speak, relentlessly, without stop. You know, we've been trying to serve that mission that we talked about. We've been trying to connect with people who are there on the front lines of struggle and slaughter, and talk and get their stories to the world, and like get people off the sidelines and get them to do something to stop this. And so like everyone else, like I was doing my best to just amidst the situation, like what do? You drop into someone's DMs and who's in Gaza City, and like
Right.
that's such a bizarre position to be in, but like you try to do it with as much care and but also brevity as you can, just saying like if you don't have to say anything about this, but if we can get your story out there, like here's how you could share it with us. Here's what we've been putting out there, just sending them reminders that like people are rising up, right? That's what we're trying to share every week at The Real News. Like we've done these great documentary reports of like the marches in London. I was there in DC a month ago amidst the largest pro-Palestine march in US history, like talking to the people who were there about why they were there. And it was an incredible thing to see, again, like just regular people say, like, again, descending on DC saying like no to this we cannot allow this. This is unbearable as a human race to let this go on. We need to step in and do something, especially in our goddamn country, which is like making it all possible and funding it and rubber stamping it. And amidst all of that, like, I've managed to connect with a few folks there in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, people of Palestinian descent, refugees, and trying as best as we can to like get these stories out there with my colleagues at The Real News. Mark Steiner's done incredible work on this. Chris Hedges has done great analysis with people who are like y'all doing that, bringing that context and information and helping people process it. So we're trying, and then me and others on our staff trying to show the people who are resisting, the unions who are taking action and blockading weapons manufacturers that are supplying Israel's military in the UK, or blocking shipments of Israel cargo in Australia, or even healthcare workers who are leading like candlelight vigils for slain colleagues in Gaza. Like, working people are rising up, and Refaat could see that. And I think it was a beautiful thing. It's been a beautiful thing over the past 24 hours to see so many people who have that connection to Refaat that I did, which was I did not have a deep connection to Refaat, but I did communicate with him a couple of times. And like, that feels special to me. I'm not going to pretend it, was a long-term friendship, but even just getting to share something with him and seeing his react to it, and wanting to do an interview if and when it was ever safe or possible to do so. And then he's gone. He's just gone, and people are sharing stories with how much he changed their worldview because they followed him on Twitter. And how much he would encourage other writers, because he himself is a born writer and storyteller and a creative writing teacher or professor and a literature scholar. Like, if I may, I was going to read quickly from something he wrote.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it just really was so beautiful. But he was that, you could see that in the connections that people are sharing on social media right now, that he was always encouraging other people to share their stories with the world and with him. He wanted people to hear Palestinian stories, which is, like why he was involved in so much of the work that he did, including We Are Not Numbers. He was an incredible human being. Not that like you need to be an incredible human being for your life to matter. In this slaughter. Every life lost is precious and unbearable. But Refaat is just like another one of those reminders of that great was it Jeffrey Sachs? I'm forgetting the genesis of the quote, but it's the one where it's like, I'm less interested in the folds and curves of Einstein's brain than I am in the certainty that people just like him have lived and died slaving away in fields and mines across the world. Refaat is like another reminder of that, just like, from the slaves who built Egypt to, like the people living in the open air prison of Gaza up until now. like there is always that potential for this kind of beauty and brilliance and humanity that Refaat embodied, and that anyone who knew him or talked to him or reads his writing or listens to him can sense. You know, and I just felt that in my own tiny way, and I'm feeling like, you know, just like what a tremendous loss to humanity this is, not only Refaat, but all of that life that is being lost, all of that humanity that we are losing by letting this happen. And I just wanted to like shut up myself and for folks watching and listening, like kind of take it back to Rafat's words in his own words, like and like you were playing in the Democracy Now! Segment. So our friends at In These Times just republished this beautiful piece that Refaat wrote for them in August of 2022. It's called In the Face of Lifelong Terror, Gaza Speaks Truth to Power. And I just wanted to sort of like take us back to Refaat in his own words about, you know, there's been so much over the past month and a half of like, where did this all start, you know, like who's the real enemy here, and you know, like it's just, if you watch corporate media, it's just like post 9/11 all over again. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And here's Refaat describing the life of people in Gaza well before October 7th, right? This is the daily reality of people, Refaat's people, our people who are living in these conditions. And Refaat writes, quote, "Early in my life, I learned one main thing about the Israeli occupation. The best course of action, whether or not you throw stones, is to run when you see soldiers, because who they target is largely arbitrary. Even if you go about your life in a peaceful way, minding your own business, if soldiers catch you, they will beat you up, or worse, arrest you, which is why Israel has killed a lot more civilians than freedom fighters. I've never been caught in my life. I was shot 3 times with rubber-coated metal bullets and was beaten only when the soldiers stormed our home. They slapped me and my brother and my cousins dozens of times because when they checked, our hearts were racing, a sign we were running and possibly throwing stones. We were between 8 and 11 years old then. Our hearts always raced. As I grew into a proud stone thrower at the age of 12, the thing I feared most was my dad's wrath. He worked in Israel as a laborer, and if he had caught me throwing stones, he would have rebuked me. My dad was not heartless or abusive. He just knew that if the Israeli forces had caught me, he would have lost his work permit. I survived the first Intifada, 1987 to 1993, in which Israel killed more than 1,300 Palestinians and injured thousands. I was lucky I escaped Israel's bullets and Yitzhak Rabin's broken bones policy. That was not true of my friend Lua Bakrun, then 13, who was chased by an Israeli settler who shot him dead from point-blank range in front of his classmates. The Israeli settler did not want to punish Lua for throwing stones, for Lua did not throw stones. The settler wanted to teach those who threw stones a lesson by killing a kid in front of the eyes of scores of little scared kids going back home from school and a few meters away from Lua's home. His mother's shrieks still ring in my ears. In the midst of writing this, I called my childhood friend and Lua's soulmate and cousin Fadi to check the date of Lua's murder. Fadi was at Shifa Hospital, parentheses, that's the one that we all saw get raided. He informed me that Hania, Lua's mother, had a cancerous tumor and couldn't travel for treatment because of the Israeli siege on Gaza. And again, this was written 2 years ago. It shall pass, I comforted Fadi. It shall pass, he echoed nonchalantly. I could keep going, but it's so beautiful and heartbreaking, and I really hope people read it.
Yeah, I'm gonna put the link. I was able to find it as you was reading it. I'm gonna put the link for those that want to, go to read the full version of this, of the full edit of this. in the description box. So check that before the episode. I'm sorry, the stream is over. Check that after the stream is over. And before closing this and moving on to suggest some more, because I do want to speak to you about a couple of things before the hour is up. But of course, labor and how can labor get involved with the fight against Israel? Because I know you've had a couple of interviews, a couple of articles I want to just kind of talk to you about. But before we do that, just to get back to, I could have put this back up actually. Just to go to another one of the sort of receipts I had of him speaking. There's a phrase that a lot of people have been saying. I guess it's sort of a famous phrase that he said, and I want to play the entire video of that. It's less than a minute long, and also show you his last his last tweet. But I'll read this part here first. Now, this is from Rami Abdul. Important information about Refaat's assassination. And the day before yesterday, he received a phone call from the Israeli intelligence about locating him in the school where he took refuge. They informed him that they were going to kill him. He left the school. He left the school not wanting to endanger the others, and at 6 p.m., his sister's apartment was bombed, where he was killed, his sister and her 4 children. So I just wanted to add that tidbit of information for those, just to know the storyline here. Now let's play this final video. This is one of the famous quotes where he says that a lot of people have been quoting him for, and I'll end this sort of segment on him with this video.
We know that it's very bleak, it's very dark. There's no way out. If there's no water, there is no way out of Gaza. What should we do? Like drown? Like commit mass suicide? Is this what Israel wants? And we're not going to do that. And I was telling some friend the other day that I am an academic. Probably the toughest thing I have at home is an expo marker. But if the Israelis invade, if they charge at us, open door to door to massacre us, I'm going to use that marker, throw it at the Israeli soldiers, even if that is the last thing that I would be able to do. And this is the feeling of everybody. We are helpless. We have nothing to lose.
That during the interview, that's an actual bomb. That's not special effects, people. So this is why we're all doing this. We all know, like, this is the reason we're all here. This is the reason, like, we do this work before this conflict sort of the temperature here sort of was turned on, hot and spicy before we got here. It's kind of like we've all been waiting for this moment to show this, to come together. And it's tragic what's happening, but I'm loving how people are coming together with this, what's happening in Palestine. It is truly just terrible. It's terrible. It's unthinkable, the things that they're going through. That is just terrible to even think about. So just to kind of pivot from, we're still staying with Palestine, what's happening in Palestine, because it's just, that sort of a topic, but just to kind of pivot and add a little bit more to what we're talking about here. What is your overall analysis, take, reaction to everything that's going on in Palestine, to how the media has been covering, and also how our government is marching in lockstep with the vote to classify anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, and a couple of other resolutions they voted on. So our government is wholly owned by one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful lobby on the planet, and that's AIPAC. But just a broad questions, because I want you to take it where you want. But what is your thinking on what's happening over there and the media's coverage and our government?
Oh man. I just keep hearing those last words from Refaat. Because I think, like, everyone who's probably watching this right now, like most people I've talked to, I think that's something I want to remind us all is, like, don't let the corporate media coverage and the consensus, the ghoulish consensus in Washington, and the sort of disconnect between the people who empower and everyone else, like, they're on a different, like, plane, but like your average person, I think, is feeling the same thing, which is like, my God, like, is someone going to stop this? How can we stop this? Like, that Rafat's dead. Like, he is one among thousands. The whole point of the organization, We Are Not Numbers, is to share those individual stories, like we were talking about in the beginning. Like, I feel like, I don't know, maybe that's also why this is affecting me so much, and I'm freaking crying. Like, is like the work that they do, like, like we were talking about, like, I feel in solidarity with anyone and everyone around the world who is, like, trying to do that work of saying we are not numbers. And, like, imagine what that means in the context in which these stories from Gaza are told, and the necessity of saving those stories so that they're not lost. But think of the thousands of stories that are being lost right now. Think of the thousands of lives. Think of all the everyone, from the elders to the infants, like, just this genocidal slaughter to clear out Gaza once and for all. And like Refaat was saying, what do you want us to do? Go drown ourselves in the ocean? Like, that's the plan, apparently, is to just, like, use this as an excuse to bomb the living shit out of a people who have already been penned into an open air prison and had an embargo around them, and, like, living in the greatest squalor one can imagine. 50% unemployment rate, half the population's children. Like, now, if they're not dead, if they're not buried under the rubble, then they are, if they're still somehow surviving, like, a C-section with no anesthesia or anything from the hospitals that have been bombed, then people are sitting in refugee camps with, like, developing, like, water-based diseases, or they're starving. I mean, like, because they can't get aid. This is a horror show. This is it. This is what you always asked yourself, in elementary school, when you learned about the atrocities of history, which was, what did people do at the time? This is your chance to answer that question. This is our chance to answer that question. And every day we don't, we lose people like Refaat, and we lose people like everyone who's died in this. That's the other thing, to answer your question of, like, how I'm coming to this. Like, again, it may sound naive, it may sound like unenlightened or whatever, but it's like, I don't want anyone to die, even the shitty people, right? I mean, like, but I recognize that that's not a utopia, like, that we're gonna just get tomorrow. But I like to just start from that basic impulse of, like, how do I minimize the death here? How do I stop all these kids from being slaughtered? Let's start there and move forward. But then you start learning about the deeper history of all of this. And that is what has changed in this moment. It is a moment that I think a lot of people thought would never come. But like you said, we are in it. It felt like it was tipping, maybe, what was it, a year and a half ago, 2 years, when the Sheikh Jarrah, mess was happening.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I think there was there was a hope there, as there has been hope in the 2014 war, the 2008 war. Like there's always been this waning hope that died every single time that hope was not fulfilled, and more Palestinians were slaughtered, and the occupation closed in more and more and rang and turned up the human misery. A situation that, as we are watching right now, as October 7th showed, makes everyone unsafe. It makes all of us unsafe. If this shit boils over into like a global conflict, well, it's already all of our problem. It's already all of our problem because, again, we are part of a human race that is doing this to ourselves. And we live in a country here that is, again, making it happen. And like, so I do think there is something really like amidst that horror, this world historical horror, there is, as I've seen, as you, I think you said, you all are seeing on your end too. It's like there's this flood of people who are like, not just like people who are already like left adjacent or independent thinkers. You don't even have to be on the left, right? But like people who, don't always buy what you're told. There's always a
sort of
group
a non-establishment.
Yeah, so there's always a sort of mixed, like group of society that like has not bought into this. People who have known the history much longer than a lot of us in the US, a lot of basic regular people who like had no occasion to learn this or the deeper history, because if they ever learned about it, and everyone's got their own problems to deal with, so like most people are, don't have the capacity in past times to, I guess, think about this. It sounds heartless, but that's just the sort of nature of living in a big world where a lot of awful stuff is always happening, and we ourselves are always struggling just to get by. I don't blame people for not knowing about what the horror that has been happening in Palestine, not only, like with this assault on Gaza after the October 7th attacks that did kill, that broke open a lot of fictions. It broke the fiction that Gaza could ever escape their prison. It broke the fiction of Israel that its walls could ever be burst or that its citizens could ever be harmed by this. So it brought down a lot of walls, I think, for people even within Israel and Palestine. But for us here in the heart of empire and people in the West in general, but definitely in the US, the primary, after Britain fucked everything up in the beginning, we are now the ones like who have been really holding the bag, dumping endless money and weapons and like boosting up Israel, like with just a blank checkbook for the entirety of its existence. and now that people on social media, basically, like, I think social media is really like giving people more of a window into what they couldn't see, just like social media has played a major role in making it possible that the police cannot deny that they are being pieces of shit and killing and beating us all the time. That fiction's gone. Thank God social media helped kill it. Now we're living in a world where it's like, okay, we know that, but it's still happening. So like, what the fuck, right? So like, that is the condition of the 21st century, is like reality. Exposing the truth is not the only thing we can do. It's not the only thing that's going to work to get us to where we need to go. I think that's a sort of demoralizing reality that I've come to realize being in this media game, is like, oh, it's like truth is got to be at the core of everything, and using that truth like to again like help do some good in the world and help people get involved in the fight to do good in the world.
That actually is a good pivot point. It's not really pivoting, but to include, because you're talking about people getting involved, and let's sort of add to this to the conversation about labor. I've read the article about what's happening and what the British have been doing, the labor in Britain have been doing in this area. But just as a broad question, actually, no, I think I have the article here. Yeah, I do actually. Forgot I had it as a slide. Okay, so for example, like this one here, and I'll read a little snippet. from this article, and this is from In These Times, and this is talking about the conditions of Palestinian workers, and then I want to sort of talk about how labor across the world could sort of help in this fight against apartheid, or I should say, in genocidal Israel. But here's a little segment from this article, and it says Palestinian workers, they are really used for cheap labor. They are dehumanized. If anybody says anything politically that the Israeli military disagree with, they don't give them work permits. And I'm going to pause here. I noticed this is a very common sort of punishment that is used to pull work permits. Could you speak to that sort of dynamic? Is that
Yep.
Why is that such a thing? Because we heard about it. Refaat was talking about his father not wanting his work permit being taken, because that's basically your livelihood. Like, basically food, whether or not I'm going to eat or not. But did you want to sort of speak to that part of this story before I read on?
Absolutely. So and this, I'm so glad you're reading from this, because I was like, oh, I recognize this. This is so we have a great relationship with In These Times. They're a phenomenal magazine. Everyone should check them out. And we like work together. We work with other great magazines like Workday magazine. And what this is the transcript of an interview that I recorded with Issa Amro, a longtime, Palestinian human rights fighter, activist, living in the West Bank. Like, I have been trying for weeks to get on a line with someone like in the West Bank or in Gaza, and that like just wasn't happening, and it was driving me insane. But it would also like be so soul crushing when I made contact, like I did with Refaat for a little bit. I would also make contact with people, and we would like exchange messages and be like, if this works out, I can maybe get you a voice message here. And then I would lose touch with them. And some I've never gotten back in touch with. I don't know if they're dead. They haven't posted. I sometimes assume the worst. But with Issa, this was such a stressful interview, because he was like the first Palestinian that I managed to like talk to on the phone. I got on the phone with him. I heard his voice, and he said, yes, I can do an interview today, but I need you to call back in like an hour. And I said, okay. But there was no internet. I could only get through on the cell line into where he was living in the West Bank near Hebron. And so I called back in an hour. He was like, I'm not done yet. Call back in 30 minutes. Call back in 30 minutes. He's like, I'm almost done. Call back in 10 minutes. Call back in 10, and then like the line's dead. And I could tell he was getting increasingly sort of stressed about something. But then suddenly it was a different dial tone. It was like, oh, I'm not even getting through anymore. And so then like your mind starts racing. And like, again, this is all happening because like another dumb part of the story, but it's in my mind, this is the memory of this interview with Issa. Was I was sitting there with like a jerry rig setup with my phone next to a microphone like this, because it's not easy to connect my phone, like, and that was the only way I could talk to Issa, was by calling him on my cell phone. So anyway, I was sitting there for 4 hours trying to like make this happen. I think 4.5 hours, and then waiting when I lost touch with him, not knowing what to do. So then I waited another half hour, and I was like, okay, well, like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to run to the office and like keep trying him there, but I got to get something there. And so I get here. I'm at the Real News Studio in Baltimore. I go into my office and I get a text from Issa, and he says, I'm sorry. I was being chased by settlers. I had to escape. I'm safe now. I can talk for 10 minutes. So like, that was the text I got.
Wow.
And I was no longer in front of at my home desk with my setup to get a good recording. So I just like drop everything. I sit down at my desk, I flip open my computer, and I hit record on QuickTime, and I call Issa on the speakerphone, and that 9-minute recording is like what we published. And it was the most intense interview I feel like I've ever done. I've done interviews that like I think were more just anyway, but it's up there, man, because it was you know, I call him, he picks up, and I say, I know you only got like a few minutes, so like, can you just tell me who you are, where you are, and what is going on around you right now? And for 9 minutes, it was just like, just so gripping and horrifying. And again, like the piece we read from Refaat, like the piece you shared by Refaat, you know, you're suddenly just, your heart is yanked into this sort of hell on earth that you didn't know existed, and like people just like you and me are living through it and dying in it. And it's just like it just so intense. And so then I talked to Issa about that. He described being captured and tortured by settlers in the West Bank who were being supported by the Israeli military. And then like I told him that the show that I do is a show that is where I talk to workers and workers listen to it. So I asked him, like, what would you tell American workers right now? What do you want them to do? And that's where he's talking about the part that you read from. And I also asked him about like what do working people in Palestine go through? Because that was the other thing I told him on the show. We talk about just the daily lives of working people, what they do, what it's like to live in their world. So I asked him, what do Palestinian workers go through? And he describes these dehumanizing realities of living in an apartheid ethno state, right? Like living in the Jim Crow South, but with a big, but getting bombed more, or living in South Africa, right? And it's just like it's part of that horrific species of human horror shows that we've and atrocities that we've committed against one another. But it's not just the bombing of Gaza, it is the daily dehumanization of Palestinians over the course of 75 plus years, as their land has been taken from them, as their family have been injured or slaughtered, as the people taking their land have been endlessly supplied and protected militarily, economically, politically by the world's superpowers. And over the course of decades, over the course of day in, day out humiliation, like what Issa is describing here. We've shown this stuff at The Real News. People can go on our YouTube channel and watch this. It's one of the most powerful thing. Well, they're done by the same group of incredible filmmakers. But one was a recent one we published, which was a 13-minute documentary from inside the Jenin refugee camp. And it's just so heart-rendering, because you're seeing these people who have lived under these conditions, who have had their, you know, there's nothing to do there. There's no economy at all. Like their entire world is secluded off and controlled by an outside power, an occupying power, and an occupying power that keeps killing and imprisoning you and stealing your land and kicking you off your land and displacing you. Like this is the daily reality of occupation that a lot of American people have not seen or not wanted to see for our entire lifetimes, because it has been going on for that long and much longer. And what we have shown by working with these incredible filmmakers, I can't remember all of their names exactly right now, so I just want to like shout them out as a collective, and people should go watch their stuff. They're incredible. But that one in Jenin refugee camp, where you have people like there who are scarred, you know, who have clearly like had like bombs blown up near them or bullets go through them, and they're wearing like, you know, just like, you know, keffiyehs and like masking their face or not, and just you see the sorrow in their eyes and the hopelessness in most things, but the fire of rebellion. And like they say things like, I wanted to be a doctor, like I wanted to be a pediatrician, I wanted to be something else, but this is the world I live in, so yeah, I'm taking up a gun. That's all that I can do, because for me the only option is die on my knees or die on my feet, so that others maybe won't have to be in this position in the future. That's the situation that people have been living in, and the way the Israeli occupation does that on a day-to-day level. Like, think of all the stories we know about just the daily indignities in the Jim Crow South, the you know, not the what am I trying to say? What's the vigilante killings? So like in like the settler
The
context,
settlers, yeah.
right? Or, you know, like, or the sort of like state sanctioned forms of incarceration or murder or dispossession or what have you. Or even occasionally, you know, like if you're the move in Philadelphia, bombing you, or if you're the coal miners in West Virginia 100 years ago fighting a war against the company, that was the other time the U.S. Army has bombed its own people. Black radicals in Philadelphia and coal miners in West Virginia, right? You know, like, so like we've gotten, again, like little tastes of that in our history, but we also have the history of, we are a successful settler colony, right? You know, like we are the living, you know, like successors of what Israel has been doing to Palestine. We like dispossessing, genociding the people, getting rid of the people who are living there. Like, and so there's so much tied up into this. But anyway, that's
I always describe it as, when I had a John Mubarak on, I said it feels like the United States is the 85-year-old colonizer looking at Israel like a teenager. Like, I remember when I was your age. You know what I mean? It feels kind of like that. But let me just finish what the article states here about the working conditions about Palestinians, and then I'll touch on one thing else before we close. But just to finish out what it's saying here, I'll start from the beginning. Palestinian workers, they are really used for cheap labor. They are dehumanized. If anybody says anything politically that the Israeli military disagrees with, they don't give them work permits. They barely earn a living. They have to go to checkpoints, go to work around 3 a.m. to reach their work at 7 a.m. Imagine that. You wake up in the very early morning to go to work. It's not a life for workers. Cheap labor without rights, without dignity, without being able to even confront or challenge the Israeli military or the Israeli apartheid system. Because it's the conditions of the Palestinian workers, the Israeli workers, they have different conditions with welfare, with insurance, with very good salaries. It's the opposite of Palestinian workers. And again, this is the title. It's an excerpt from this article. I want American workers to be united to make the occupation costly, to make the Israeli apartheid costly. So this title triggers the next question, and that is, what are some of the things, because I know you've reported on different workers and what they've been doing to sort of fight back, do what they can. So I'll just broadly just ask you the question, like, what are some of the things worldwide that are those workers who are in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle? What are some of the things that you're hearing, that you've reported on, that they've done in solidarity with the Palestinians?
Yeah. So it was so powerful to hear Issa say those words, right? Like his message, like, it's like, you know, again, I was thinking of like Lenin's letter to American workers, right? I mean, like, totally different context, but there's something that's so powerful about this tradition, right? Of like sending that message, like, not to the people in power, but to the workers of this country, about like, you know, what can you do, you know, to fight back? And, you know, like, for Issa describing that, and he said so many like beautiful things as well. And the other quick parentheses, I want to mention that you can watch another video on our channel of workers in Palestine going through those hellish checkpoints at 3 a.m. It is like children of men shit in real life.
Wow.
It's one of the most like just impactful things that I think we've ever published, at least in my time there. But it's this team did an incredible job. They're there at the checkpoint in the middle of the night, talking to workers through bars who are smoking cigarettes and saying like, yeah, I have to go through this every day. And like you said, like, you know, we can't speak up about it. We can't, like, if we say anything, we get our access cut off and our livelihoods are gone, right? And you just the disrespect, the inhumanity, the indignity of it all, the humiliation, the deliberate and systematic humiliation of another people. That is the reality of what our fellow human beings in occupied Palestine have been going through. And it is what our fellow human beings who are in the DRC are going through right now. There's also a humanitarian crisis going on there in the Congo. Like, I mean, like, yet there's so much hurt in the world, and I know that our hearts are only so big, but we can at least start from a place of caring enough about each other to say that this is all wrong. All of it. I don't want to pick sides anymore. I just want to I'm looking around and all I'm seeing is death, destruction, and war, and people working people the world over having their lives, their dignity, their very planet destroyed and ripped away from us. I'm tired of seeing that. And so I think it's so powerful to see working people the world over take up the mantle that we have shown in our own history, that we will fight for what is right. Those coal miners in West Virginia who literally, we don't learn about this in K through 12 in this country. I did not know the story of coal miners going to literal war and having machine guns in the hills, fighting a company and the state government. But that same spirit of rebellion is all throughout our history, and including in the fight, in past fights, to stand up against genocide, to stand up against war, to stand up against apartheid. Working people have used their power as workers and as citizens. They have stood up and said, I'm going to try to do something. We got to do something to try to stop this. And I think that along with the sort of changes in the media we were just talking about, this is also an incredible moment where you are seeing, these just mass demonstrations in cities around the world, Latin America, Europe, here in the United States. I mean, the world is not with this, right? I mean, I think that we are in the majority of people who don't want this to be happening. And when I say this, I don't just mean a temporary pause on the slaughter. I mean an end to the occupation, an end to this apartheid system, an end to this colonialist nightmare. And this cannot continue, because this is the end result of it. This is the only result of settler colonialism. Again, we're sitting on the land that is proof of that.
But when you try to speak out against these things, because you mentioned the protests, so I want to make sure I capitalize on that. You mentioned the protests. You have the backlash against college students. You see some of them getting suspended. But this was something, when I was preparing for you to come on, I don't know how I missed this story. But this was astonishing to me. I don't know if the results have changed, and I'll ask you for an update if you know an update on this story. But the New York Supreme Court just blocked a union from voting on a pro-Palestinian resolution, which is crazy to me. But just to sum up, for the sake of time, just to sum up what happened in this story, I guess this is a radical. This union has some radical members, and they wanted to show their solidarity, at least. Being that they're all the way over here across the sea over here, show their solidarity just by a resolution. That's it. They just wanted to vote on the resolution, a piece of paper that says this is what we believe, and we're standing in solidarity with Palestinians. And I guess the union bosses, if I'm getting the story wrong, let me know. The union bosses catch word of this, and it goes all the way to court. And go ahead if you wanted to.
Yeah,
finish the story. Yeah,
it's a weird, thorny, but really important and consequential story that it's wild, because I knew about this union. This is a UAW local that represents legal aid workers at public defenders offices and stuff around the city, right? So, I mean, we're not talking about the big fancy lawyers here. We're talking about the public defenders, the people who take, you know, the people's, all the crap that people have to go to court for, you know, like this is the union that is formed in New York City to connect like those workers so that they have a basic standard of work, yada, yada, yada. So I know about them because I've actually like walked one of their picket lines when like one of the offices where workers were represented by that union were in negotiations and fighting for a fair contract. And so now I hear about them, someone that I know like in the union, like, and it was connected to the union, tells me that like, hey, like this just happened. And I was like, there's no wait, that can't be true because I've never seen this before. I've seen, I mean, obviously like during the McCarthyite period, like there was a lot of underhanded shit. A lot of people's lives were ruined. Courts were weaponized against workers like they always are, but like it was really, really bad. But this is really, I think, significant. But what it is that the union, which again represents different offices, so not all the people work together, like they're all legal aid workers, but the union drafted a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire, an end to the 75-year occupation, Israel's 75-year occupation of Palestine, you know, and they're lawyers, right? Like it was very methodically, but very like strongly written, and the union was going to have a vote on it because that's ideally what unions should be, is like the principle of democracy translated into the workplace, right? And workers themselves like owning and operating this union and making it their own and deciding as a group, do we want to put this statement out there? So they were going to vote on it. It was going to be on a Friday. And like in the days leading up to that, the workers were getting like basically like, you know, it's kind of like the political equivalent of captive audience meetings where the bosses at these different legal offices were really trying to encourage workers to vote no on this resolution because they were scared that like their clients would not want to work with them, or that more importantly their funders, their donors, because again, like legal aid, you know, public defenders, they don't make enough to like properly represent anyone because this shithole country stacks everything in favor of the rich. But you know, you got a situation like that. So like they're worried about if their donors are going to like pull funding, if the union that the workers at this legal aid office work at posts this resolution. But so they got that from the bosses, but it was actually 4 bargaining unit members, 4 fellow workers in the union, Zionist members, who went to the New York Supreme Court. And again, they're lawyers too, but they filed to have a temporary restraining order slapped on the union to prevent it from even voting on the resolution. And I had never seen that before, a union, because the Supreme Court the next day granted the temporary restraining order, and the union, I've never seen a court put a restraining order on a union to prevent it from even voting on a resolution. Like that is a direct attack on free speech, on democracy and all that fucking shit. And so right now, if I know, so it's December 8th, I believe that this is still right. The temporary restraining order was actually extended 30 days after the initial ruling. And I think we are in that.
So that is the update. That is the update. Okay.
So it's not out.
Because when I read this, I was like, oh, of course, when they go to court, they're gonna go, oh, this is nuts, and we're gonna dismiss it. And you're telling me they extended it by 30 days. That is that's incredible that they would do something like that. So when go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, and I just wanted to throw one because I really, again, thank you so much for letting me like yak on, and I'm sorry if I like deviated from the questions, but just to make sure
it's still on topic. Go
ahead. Just to quickly also answer the previous question, which was a really important one about like what is labor doing at this moment?
Oh,
that
yes,
that is a really important question, and I think like it's been in the U.S. labor has not been doing enough. That's the first answer. And like there are some exceptions, like the United Electrical Workers, who are not affiliated with the AFL-CIO, like even before October 7th, back in September, they had like a national like resolution reaffirming their commitment to the Palestinian call for BDS, right? And they called in that national resolution to end military aid to Israel, U.S. military aid to Israel. So UE is like one of the exceptions, you know, and there are a more radical, historically radical union, and that's great. And now fast forward to today, the UAW has been the largest union calling for a ceasefire. There's just been a lot of in between in the big organized labor movement. There have been some, but by and large, you know, the established labor movement has been another lockstep backer of Israel in its time. Trumka, you know, Rich Trumka, you know, rest in peace. And thanks for the good work that you did, but also like he was one of those voices with endless support for Israel. And in fact, the AFL-CIO has a dirty history of like sanctioning other unions or union locals that try to speak out about, that have tried in the past to speak out against Israel's occupation of Palestine. So organized labor does not have a great track record on this issue at all, but there are really good pockets of hope and tradition that, like the ILWU and the dock workers who stood up against apartheid in South Africa, but they were not the only ones, right? So there is a great rich tradition there that we are seeing playing out here in the US, not only with, you know, unions can represent a whole lot of different workers. So legal aid workers wanted to put out this resolution, but they were stopped by a court, but they still are trying to do something. The UAW calls for a ceasefire. That is really important. That is a sea change in terms of the discourse here. But also it's still not enough. What you are seeing outside of the US is more groups of workers and big groups of workers using their collective power, like they do during strikes and you know, other demonstrations, like flexing that collective worker power to there were workers in the UK that I interviewed on the Real News Network who formed a human blockade around an Israel weapons manufacturer. Or I mentioned the Australian workers who were blocking Israeli cargo at the Melbourne port. I talked to them as well. You know, there's the dock workers in Italy and Belgium, among other places, Spain, you know, who have said, like, we will not unload cargo that we know is headed to Israel, right? I mean, like, there are people who are like even holding like demonstrations or going to demonstrations. You know, like, you know, people can be workers, but still go to support actions that are organized by like not by unions, right? I mean, that's it's all part of it. And a lot of the people who show up to demonstrations like the one in DC, they're workers too, right? So it doesn't have to be part of the organized labor movement, but I do think we are seeing more unions, and I would point people to great writing by folks like Sarah Lazar and Jeff Shirky, because I know I'm going horse here and we got to wrap up, but they've done a great job reporting on the unions that have been speaking out. Starbucks Workers United, the United Electrical Workers, the unions that have been speaking like full-throatedly for Israel, like the AFT, you know, and again, they're not the only ones. So it's kind of a mixed bag here, but I think you're also seeing a lot of rank and file resistance. You're seeing a lot more people, like Palestine Action, you know, like chain themselves to the gates of Israeli weapons suppliers, or college students who are like occupying campus buildings, or groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now, and just people of conscience all over the country and all over the world who are taking direct action to try to disrupt business as usual, because this should not be business as usual. This needs to stop. And like, people are getting increasingly, I think, bold, not just because they are emboldened by the horror that they're seeing, but also because they are seeing some results. They are seeing the desperation coming from Israel and Washington, D.C. They are seeing the sea change in public opinion and desire and demand on corporate media channels that they provide more coverage of the things that they have not been showing us all this time. And if they're not going to do that, then people are going to try to find those answers elsewhere by going to independent media or what have you. But I do, so like a lot is happening. A lot of younger Jews are like really leading the charge and like saying this is not going to be done in our name. But like you said, we are also experiencing a really intense, scary moment of repression that every one of us needs to be exceedingly concerned about, because it's not just the implications of a court can take your right as a union away from even voting on a resolution that you democratically like want to vote on. It's not just that. It's, as you said, people just losing their jobs, people, like being, like attacked, people being shot, like, this is real shit. This is like fomenting, like a lot of division and fear amongst an already very divided and fearful country. So yeah, we just gotta like, we gotta fight.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And seeing some of the like the blockade that you just spoke about, like for whatever reason, when this first popped off, first month, I was not thinking at all labor being a part of this resistance. And the first time I heard about it was maybe the third week. And I was like, oh, this labor union is doing it. I was like, wow, that is something that we can do. So everybody has a way of contributing to stopping what Israel is doing. And the hope is collectively, all of us together and those niche things that we're doing collectively is able to put enough pressure to stop this genocide. I just don't know what Israel expect to happen on the other side of what's happening. It doesn't feel like they care at all, or almost like they feel like they're gonna just be on the island by themselves, and they know that. So I'm not sure where they're going with it, but I do want to thank you for coming on. I know I think we told you like 60 minutes. I know we went like 50% more than that, but
was my fault.
Yeah, but when we're flowing like that, we never want to just cut it off just because we said 60 minutes. But we definitely got to have you back on. We want to talk more about labor, because we right now we were doing a lot of more community work, and we want to now start branching off to getting more involved with labor in whatever capacity that we can on our network. But that is something we have a goal of doing in this upcoming year, 2024. That's one of our goals. So, but if you want to just shout out anything, you want to shout out any action, any direct action coming up, any website, anything you want to shout out, of course, let everybody know where we can find you. And then definitely we have to send you another invitation in the near future, in the beginning of 2024, to come back on so we can have these conversations again. But what are your closing sort of words, and what do you want to shout out before we close?
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much again for having me on. This was a blast, but also like, yeah, a great conversation. I really appreciate the deep, thoughtful questions, and yeah, like apologies if I got rambly, but
No, not at all.
It meant a lot.
That was great. That was a good part of this.
yeah, it felt good to talk these things through, especially like it's such a heartbreaking moment that we're in, and that's again, I just imagine where a lot of us are right now, and I don't feel the need that I don't think any of us should feel like we should pretend otherwise. Like, it's okay to be affected by this. In fact, in some ways, it's a good thing, right? Because if you could see this happen, all of this, and just be okay with it, then that's really sad to me, because you're worth more than that, and we are worth more than that. And so my parting words to folks watching is just, you're part of that too, right? Like, we're all part of that. What I say all the time at The Real News is no one can do everything, but everyone can do something, right? And there are people doing something all around you. Like, you don't have to chain yourself to the gate of an Israeli weapons supplier. There are other ways to get involved too, but it's just like we were talking about in the beginning, like that soul, that spirit that is at the core of the labor movement, which is just when people stop taking orders and start pushing back and fighting for what they know they deserve, and they see that we can actually change our circumstances, if we work together. And we're not going to change any of this by ourselves. Clearly, right? It's clearly going to take more people, more organization, more fight back, more persistence. We can't just forget about this like we forget about everything, right? It's going to happen, like it always does, but we got to fight as hard as we can to not lose focus on what is happening, not just become adjusted and acclimated to it. And so we have this moment right now to seize on and to fight for our humanity, right? To fight, to tell our children that we did what we could to stop the horrors that they are reading about and that we were alive for, right? We did everything we could to prevent them from living in the hellscape that they will hopefully not be living in, or that we could tell them with confidence that we help them avoid, right? Like that is the stake. These are the stakes of like what we do right now, whether in every sense of the word, right? Like in every, not just in stopping the genocidal destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza and across the board. I mean, like, but the erasure of life, the destruction of life, and the destruction of planetary life and human life and Black life, indigenous life. Like the lives of so many people who live in a system that does not give a shit about them, that works us to the bone until we're 80 and like that we can't even enjoy the life that we still have because our backs are thrown out, like or we have black lung from working in the damn mines, right? So anyway, before I go too wide with it, the bring it back is just like my parting words is that you can do something about this. We should do something about this. I'm not here to judge which way is the best way to do something about this. All I would say is just remember that you have that power but you are just one person. So use it wisely, use it where you can, support people who are already doing work like that. Because again, we're stronger together if we pool our resources, so on and so forth. We can achieve more. So that can look a lot of different ways. And so do what works for you. Be brave about it. Because we need you. We need that bravery. We need to stand up, even if it's a really scary moment of McCarthyite repression right now. We need to be there to support each other in that as well. This is it. This is the chance. This is the moment. So what are we going to tell our children we did, right? And are we prepared to fight for the world we deserve for as long as it takes? Because we need to be, because it's not going to happen overnight, and it's probably not going to happen in our lifetimes. It is a life's work. So we need to settle in and do what we can where we are. And just fight as hard as we can. That's the best that any of us can do. And that's what we try to cover at The Real News, the people who are fighting that fight here in the US, around the world, against the police, against the prison industrial complex. I talk to workers who are fighting against the bosses, who are fighting a rigged economy that exploits and dehumanizes all of us. But I also, as we said, I talk to them about their lives, their dreams, their hopes, their accomplishments. So I would, just ask folks to check out the work that we do, that I do, my colleague Mark Steiner, Chris Hedges, Stephen Taya, Stephen Janis, Taya Graham, Mel Buer, Mansa Musa, our dearly departed brother Eddie Conway. I mean, the whole team, the studio team, the editorial team. There's a lot of people here who work their butts off to try to make a little bit of a difference in the world. So please support us. We are, like everyone else, raising money right now to keep going. So if you have the ability to support our work, if you want to, please head on over to therealnews.com/donate. And also, if I can take my Real News hat off just for a second, I myself, with my podcast producer, Jules Taylor, are working with residents of East Palestine, Ohio, not to be confused with the Palestine that we've been talking about, but as we all know, the place where a Norfolk Southern train derailed on February 3rd, the ridiculous decision to burn off all this toxic all this toxic crap, vinyl chloride, and the hell that they've been living through since then. I've been interviewing these folks throughout the year, and I'm just so my heart breaks for them, and I keep trying to lift up their stories. And I and my producer Jules Taylor am working with folks like Chris and Jessica Albright in East Palestine to do a live stream fundraiser on December 16th, that Saturday, December 16th, for 12 hours. We're going to be doing a live stream fundraiser, as well as there's going to be an in-person of like party that the Albrights and others in town are helping to organize. And it's all for just like trying to raise money so that we can buy enough gift cards for families who sign up, who they say no questions asked. We just say household, how many kids you got, you know, like, do you prefer this gift card or that gift card? That seems to be the easiest way to get people money quickly. And no one has, you know, the money they need for Christmas because they've been left in this industrial disaster hellscape where they, you know, like they're all like half the population's sick, half the population has gotten numb to it, and so they think the people who are sick are faking it, and like Norfolk Southern is abandoning them, the government is abandoning them. People like Chris Albright are suffering health conditions that mean they can't work and they can't pay to buy presents for their kids. So we're just trying to like be part of a sort of spirit of the holidays push to raise some money so that the families of East Palestine can try to give their kids a Christmas. So if folks check out, we're going to be doing that on Saturday, December 16th on the Working People YouTube channel. So thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for letting me yak on. Thank you for the work you do. I really, really appreciate it and love the conversation. Thank you everyone for listening.
Absolutely. And just FYI, the East Palestine story was the story that I had to bump to bring in Refaat. I was going to cover that because I did listen to part of that podcast, about half of it, where you were interviewing. And what I remember, the line, I remember the disaster that's happening in Palestine is far from over. That's essentially, people think this is it's over. Well, I don't hear about it no more. I guess it must have been resolved, and that's far from the truth. So hopefully the next time we have you on, we'll be able to talk about what's happening in East Palestine. So we're still on Palestine. We're just in East Palestine, Ohio. So, yeah. All right. Thanks again. I'll put you in the bag. This was a great conversation, and everybody in the audience has said that this was a wonderful interview. And we love to bring you content like this. As you can see, I'm not always yelling, although things get me upset. I'm not always yelling. I can have interviews where I'm pretty calm, and I think today's interview was that. I'm gonna read some super chats, and then I'm gonna head on out of here. Getting ready to do some things with my wife, take the kids over to my mom so I can have some time to celebrate my birthday, and I'm celebrating my wedding anniversary too, which was on the 3rd of December. December is a very busy and expensive month for me every single year. December is and this year is not any different. So the 3rd, my anniversary, the 8th is my birthday. My youngest daughter's birthday is also a week after mine. So pretty much every weekend in December there's a family event, and this weekend is my birthday. So that is what I'm doing. Let's see. Do I have any closeout video? I don't see any sort of breaking top news. When I usually go through my feed, that's what I'm looking for, just to see if there's any sort of breaking news. And I think the resolution, UN resolution, is what I'm seeing pop up multiple times. So maybe that's one of the top stories. And this is Sabby saying something about it. She says the U.S. voted against ceasefire. The U.S. government supports the death of Palestinian children. Never forget that. And I don't know if I want to play that. That's kind of a bummer. Do I have any hopeful sort of closeout videos? Let's see if I do. Well, maybe I don't, sir. I haven't really been posting videos lately. I've been posting a lot of articles. That is what I've been posting. Oh, this is interesting. DNA connection of people in Australia. I guess I can maybe play you this. It's not political at all, but I don't know. Anyway, so how about this? We won't end on any sort of video. I'll just read the super chats and then we'll be out of here. So let's start here at the bottom. Great. Oh, see, again, here we go. I got to read it on the screen. For some reason, it's not showing. I think it says great interview, CJ. Amazing. Yes. Thank you. And that's Have Dahlia. Adalia. I think that's how you say it. And then this next one, how about I read before I click on it? This next one from Amanda. It's disgusting how Israel murders Teutone police. And that is super chat from Amanda. Thank you for that super chat, Amanda. And the next one is from John Fries. Happy birthday, sir, from a fellow Sagittarius. And that is from John. Thank you for that super chat. The next one, Eric Elmore. Happiest birthday, CJ. I always love your insightful analysis. Much love. And much love to you. Thank you so much for the super chat and the birthday wishes. This next one from Samuel Bruce. Happy birthday, CJ. Keep up the great work. And thank you, Samuel, for that. And these last ones I'll post. I won't read because I read them already, but I will post again. Some other birthday wishes. Thank you all for all of your birthday wishes today. I'll scroll across the bottom. The CJ fundraiser. We hit our target. Thank you so much for all of those that donated. Actually, I can show you that. All those that donated. Let's go to that tweet. Yeah. Right here. Oh, when you quote tweet, they don't put those there, so I have to go here to see what I wrote. Here. Thank you for all the birthday wishes. Thank you to everyone that donated to my fundraiser. We hit the goal on my birthday today. I ask that you give to someone in need in your local community. Giving is not just money. You can give your time, your energy, and your effort in trying to make someone else's life a little bit better. So on my birthday, that's what I ask for everybody to do. Do something nice for somebody. Do something nice for somebody in your community, for your neighbor, for your loved one. Thank you to all. I gotta have some sort of, do I have a old video when I was younger to play? I don't think I have one. I don't think I have an old video to play. I don't think so. But what I can do is one of my favorite radicals and one of the best speakers that we that we all love. Wow, I type in Malcolm X and Refaat is coming up when I type in Malcolm X. Also, that is incredible. So I'll leave you with this video from Malcolm X, I guess. Is this Malcolm X? Oh, no. This one right here. Let's do this one. All right. So I think I'll leave you here. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This was a great interview. I don't come always on Fridays, but today I was happy we had this interview. Even if it landed on my birthday. Great interview. Thank you again, Maximillian Alvarez from the Real News Network. It was a great interview. Appreciate all that is done over at the Real News Network. I'm going to leave you. Scrolling at the bottom is our Patreon link, and this is Malcolm X. Thank you for watching.
Very simple answer to one question. Do you hate all white people? I don't think it's a fair question. The white man doesn't even come into my attitude. Mr. Muhammad teaches us to love our own kind and let the white man take care of himself. For a white man today, sir, after kidnapping millions of black people from Africa, stripping them of all human characteristics and relegating them to the role of chattel or cattle or animals, commodity, merchandise that could be bought and sold at will. And then 100 years since the Emancipation Proclamation, using every type of deceptive method to further us into slavery, called second-class citizenship, I think that it would take a whole lot of nerve for white people today to ask Negroes, do they hate them?